Okay, here's the third video installment for criminal justice, race, and gender as I adjust my camera. This is the last slide you saw. We're talking about social learning. The last of the three sources of prejudice that I want to present to you in this class. And hopefully you have those in your notes. Keep taking notes, just like the first two videos. I want to give you some nuggets here that I want you to have in your notes as well. You will not find this stuff in your textbook, what I'm giving you here. There's a lot of research on stereotypes, and I don't want to turn this into social psychology or sociology, but it's important to talk about it because this stuff will definitely apply to our course. Research suggests that there is a kernel of truth. There's actually a hypothesis called the kernel of truth hypothesis. There is a kernel of truth in most stereotypes. In other words, there's a tiny little bit of truth, but we tend to exaggerate these kernels of truth. We exaggerate them and generalize them to everybody defined within a social category. Now, there's historical explanation for why African Americans ate fried chicken. I'm not going to turn this into a history lesson, but it goes back to the times of slavery. And if you do some research, and I'll let you do that if you want, you will discover why it is that African Americans ate chicken a lot during the times of slavery, and that has carried over to today, when we could explore why or why not. That's another topic for another day. But there's some historical support for that. Now, that doesn't mean every black person likes fried chicken or eats fried chicken or watermelon for that matter. Next, research also suggests that we tend to stereotype more fervently or strongly and more quickly when we are agitated. So research studies have been shown that people who are upset, angry, agitated are more apt to stereotype and more quickly stereotype. And then we get into law enforcement. Law enforcement officers have tough jobs. They really do. Police officers who are out on the streets dealing with dangerous situations and criminals, I have all the respect in the world for them. Research does show when they're in situations where they're aggravated or upset or they become angered by a situation, those stereotypes tend to not just kick in, but they get stronger. And you can see how that might affect how they would arrest, or even if they would arrest a certain person from a certain race, or a man versus a woman. We also tend, conversely, to stereotype less when we are happy or satisfied at a specific time. So that's important to have in your notes. So research has shown us that law enforcement officers, judges, people in the system, even your private citizens, anybody, if you're happy or satisfied with your life situation, you're less likely to stereotype. Here's some more. Some research suggests that certain personality types are prone to more prejudice, such as the authoritarian personality type. You don't need to know the authoritarian personality type, I'm just saying. And with stereotyping often comes subsequent discrimination. Get this in your notes too. I want you to write this down. Discrimination, word right there. Discrimination is the act of working for or against someone or something. It's the behavior. Okay. Prejudice and stereotyping are attitudes. The discrimination, again, is the behavior. So if I discriminate against someone because they are African American, not only am I biased and prejudiced, but I am also discriminating if I am in a position to hire, and I do not hire you because you are an African American. That's discrimination, and it's also illegal, by the way. But that's discrimination. Stereotypes exist in a lot of areas. Again, there's a ton of research on. I don't want to beat you up with it all. We can stereotype based on age, race, religion. My arrow is moving slow. There it is. Sexual orientation, etc. All aspects that make up a person can be stereotyped. And of course, this class focuses on race and on gender. Here's another one. A stereotyping to us is useful because we like to organize our thoughts by structuring and grouping our ideas. It's efficient. Instead of taking the time to get to know someone personally, it's easier just to look at somebody and say, oh, okay, she's dressed in guy's clothes, she's got short hair, she's built like a guy, she's automatically a lesbian. And she probably is a mechanic, and she probably likes to play sports, probably rugby. those are gross stereotypes. It's easier, though, for us to look at people and categorize and just make snap decisions and assume that they belong to a specific group. So stereotyping clears up haziness. It allows us to determine whether or not we are in a specific group or outside of a specific group. It helps us to kind of understand where we relate and kind of where we fit in or don't fit in. The tragic thing about stereotyping is that while it is efficient, it's often inaccurate. Because not everybody who looks a certain way acts a certain way. Just because someone is black and wears saggy pants doesn't mean that he is selling drugs and heading for jail. Just because a man is wearing a pink shirt and maybe likes to play the piano or is involved with theater doesn't mean that he is necessarily gay. We could go on and on and on. Also, stereotypes may arise from fear. Most stereotypes do come from ignorance or fear. When people encounter someone who appears to be different than them, this fear might be related to imagined threats of personal injury or perhaps an insecurity over economic or social status. So stereotypes do come from fear. I always tell the story, and I told it last semester to my Intro to Criminal Justice students. My grandmother, God rest her soul, didn't get out much during her life, but toward the end of her life, I remember the first time I drove her to Charleston. We were at a stoplight, and she told me to lock the doors. She was frantic. She's like, "Brandon, lock the doors, lock the doors." And these were the kind of doors that didn't have the power lock. She literally had to take your hand and push down the lock. So I'm doing that thinking, what's going on? And I asked her, I'm like, why do we do that? She said, well, there are black people around. I'm like, oh, goodness, Grandma, we got to get past this. But her fear, her stereotyping of African Americans came from fear. And she did overcome that to some extent before she died, to her credit. So I'm going to go ahead and call that the end of this part, of part 3 for the lecture on chapter 2, Criminal Justice, Bridge Valley Community Technical College. Thank you.